Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another impact interview organized by AESIS. And this month, we will be focusing on skills and training for impact. For societal impact of science to occur, actors on all sides that have anything to do with this process need to be able to reach out to each other, to engage with each other. And in order to do that, that usually means that they actually have to do a bit more than they originally maybe expected their job would entail. And to talk about that, how this can go better, how we should approach this, I have a wonderful friend of mine here, which is Sandra Lapointe. Welcome, Sandra.
Thanks for the invitation, Annika.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. I will just give the floor to you because I would like you to tell everyone, what it is you do and what your relationship is to impact. Well, let's start with the introductions.
Yes, so technically I'm a professor of philosophy. I'm also a former president of the Canadian Philosophical Association and a former board member of the Federation for the Social Science and Humanities. And until about 5 years ago, my profile was pretty much one of your standard garden variety researcher in the humanities. I was focused on my specialist research. But as I engage as a member of the academic community around questions that have to do with knowledge mobilization and training, I became aware of the specific situation in the social science and humanities and got interested in these questions. And the work that I've done with the Federation was very enlightening. And so that actually led me to host one of your conferences last fall around the societal impact of the social science and humanities specifically.
Yes, it was an absolutely pleasure to work with you back then. I have fond memories of that. So can I ask, just for a bit more personal background, was there a specific moment that you thought, what, I want to step out of this specified and specialized research, and I want to do more for the Federation, the collaborative, of course, you work with? Was there a specific moment that you thought, this is what happened and that's why I went for it?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, one of the very first things that I did as the incoming president of the Canadian Philosophical Association was to attend an annual conference of the Federation for the Social Science and Humanities, at which a workshop was organized by our friend David Phipps, talking about social impact, or the impact of social science and humanities. And that's the very moment at which I realized that the standard models of impact for sciences don't always work for disciplines, and especially disciplines in the humanities and the social sciences. And that led me to try to better understand, on the one hand, what kinds of needs we're trying to address when we're mobilizing our expert knowledge, but also what kind of expertise needs to be mobilized to address these needs. The models that are available to us are often mapped on what's happening in the sciences, in the STEMs, and that does not always work because of the nature of social science and humanities knowledge. We have to think of other ways to mobilize our expertise and our know-how.
Absolutely. And that might also bring us to, what this month's theme is, that we are looking at the fact that for more knowledge mobilization to happen, that also kind of requires more of both the researchers and the research managers, but also maybe the organizations in society that are having the value, hopefully experiencing the value of science. So maybe starting with the academic or the science side, what in your experience are the things, the skills, the talents that are needed in order to have more effective impact on society?
I think that there are two broad categories of skills that are needed. And of course, then you have to unpack what those are. But I think that what researchers and emerging researchers in the social science and humanities need in order to be able to create societal impact are, on the one hand, skills for partnerships, and on the other hand, skills for innovation. And then, of course, the question is what those are. But partnerships are needed because it's very difficult to mobilize knowledge in a way that's relevant if you're not aware of the needs that you're trying to address through your research. And the best models that exist in terms of mobilizing knowledge are partnered models. But of course, in order to be able to sustain a partnership, you need to be able to partner efficiently and in a way also that shows a respect for different cultures and different sectors, and the cultures in different sectors, but also a certain kind of social and emotional and ethical intelligence that's not involved when your research is on the individualistic model, which is very standard in the humanities and in some of the social sciences as well. And of course, it seems obvious to say that you need to have the skills for innovation, but these skills need to be acquired in a way that's very deliberate. So if we want to be able to build these skills for partnership, these skills for collaborations and cooperations that are transsectoral or interdisciplinary, and if we want to make sure that our emerging researchers do have the skills for innovation, we have to better understand what's involved and what is meant when we're talking about innovation too.
Yes, and I think maybe because you already hinted at that as well, but the partnerships, I assume it's not just externally, it's also, because you mentioned it's often individual research, but what also really helps is, of course, interdisciplinary engagement, team science.
Exactly.
In order to not only increase your research excellence, but also pave the way towards societal impact.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Especially for the social science and humanities, there's a lot of impact we can have as part of partnerships with the STEMs, as part of big interdisciplinary research programs that do require the expert knowledge of the social scientists. And you can think just about, for instance, post-COVID recovery. Most of the problems that need to be addressed in the post-COVID recovery are going to be social problems. They are going to require an understanding of society and of the human. But there are other such challenges, such as artificial intelligence, genomics and genetics, or climate change. And in these situations, you can see that the knowledge that is required is, of course, technical and scientific. We need to have the facts about the sciences, but we also have to be able to understand how that knowledge can help improve human existence and the growth and flourishing of societies.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned it before, but maybe we can specify it a little bit. The difference between sciences versus, or even medical sciences and STEM, and versus what social sciences and humanities face in that. Is it because the impact is different, or it's because it's a different pathway, or because the research is different? And how does that affect the types of, well, the partnerships versus the skills, the innovation skills that they would need?
Right. So I think that in terms of what skills are needed, there's no difference between the social science and humanities and the STEMs. What's important to understand is how these skills are best acquired and how they are honed. When we're thinking about the skills that are needed for innovations and the skills that are needed for partnership, we're thinking about two very different kinds of skills. We've done our homework around what these skills are meant to be. It's published in a report that's called Foundational Skills and What the Social Sciences and Humanities Need to Know. And So we try to understand how different skill clusters can contribute to innovation or to the kind of social, emotional, and ethical intelligence that is needed in collaborative settings as part of partnerships. And there's very little difference between the social sciences and the STEMs when it comes to what skills are going to be contributing to innovation and to collaboration. There's always a certain level of technical skills that need to be involved, but in terms of these foundational skills, they're the same. The difference is how they are acquired and honed. What's interesting is that in the STEM, at the postgraduate level, often the kinds of settings for research are themselves very collaborative. In engineering, in the medical sciences, postgraduate students work as part of teams, which is a context which very much resembles the kind of collaborative settings that you would find in a cross-sectoral collaboration or in an interdisciplinary setting. So it's easier for them to apply skills that they already have towards collaboration. And this practice is one way to hone the skills. That does not happen very often in social science and humanities. However, the training at the undergraduate level, continuing into the postgraduate level in social science and humanities, is very fruitful when it comes to developing the kinds of skills that are associated with innovation. So you will have skills like critical thinking or analytical thinking or problem solving, which is basically the bread and butter of your average degree in philosophy or history or even religious studies or anthropology, intercultural awareness. So those are skills that are the focus of an undergraduate education in the social science and humanities. So what we have to do is to be more deliberate about fostering those skills, and especially at the postgraduate level in research context, there's a lot of talent building that needs to happen that has to be deliberate. And one of the often the opportunities to build skills like collaboration or communications, which is also very important in team settings. They are associated not so much with research training, but with professional development. So the graduate student who wants to become better at project management or at communications needs to take time away from their research training to be able to build that in a professional setting. And that's the wrong strategy because these skills, communication, intercultural awareness, team management, they're all also needed in research contexts, especially in collaborative research contexts, and especially in partnerships around research, partnerships, interdisciplinary contexts, but also partnerships with community partners, industry, not-for-profit, government. Perhaps one way to increase the societal impact of social science and humanities is to rethink our strategies when it comes to research training and research development and provide supervisors with the kind of support that they need in order to make sure that their students do acquire those skills, because it's not fair to expect that supervisors are going to be providing this training themselves. They never received it. They don't know how to start, but it definitely is the sign of a fruitful academic environment when students are provided with those opportunities to build skills for partnership and innovation.
So then actually maybe the solution would be that it's not necessarily mandatory, but more naturally integrated, that certain parts of the professional training, professional development training are integrated in the usual research training. And that, of course, needs to be something that then is also incentivized from management and part of the strategy and policy, because if not,
That is exactly right. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I get very excited about this. Actually, this this idea that what we need to do is to rethink the relationship between professional development in academic setting and research training is something that we've been exploring with a variety of partners. And it's very clear, even from what is expected in terms of skills building from funding agencies, that students are expected to build these professional skills as part of their research training. It doesn't take much to actually turn research training into an environment that provides the students with the skills that they need. Is basically just a repackaging or rebranding of your usual professional development, but presented in a way that's going to be relevant to the researcher.
And do you think the reason that that is not yet happening does that have something to do with just simply not having grown towards yet, sticking kind of to what they're used to? Is it maybe also not finding it important enough, not seeing the value, or is it maybe even thinking, you know, if we develop them too much on professional level, we might lose them all? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. The fear of making these changes, what does it come from? Or is it fear, or just neglect, or not understanding?
It takes time to change a culture, an academic culture especially. And so given the fact that in most programs, at most 30% of your PhD students will be able to stay in academia, and everyone else will have to transition into industry or into the public sector. It can't be because they're afraid people are going to go into, maybe that's a problem for the STEMs, but it definitely is not a problem in the social science and humanities, because the expectation is that, or the desire is that one will continue in academia and have an academic career. So there's a cultural change that needs to happen, because often in social science and humanities, the idea of industry or the idea of working outside of academia is sort of a frightening idea. And as an academic, I'm a member of the academic community, I'm very much aware that this is also part of the values of academia, that there's a value in science for science. And we want to shield our students from having to think, you know, about the practicalities of living and surviving in the real world. But the world has changed very rapidly, and we're still catching up. But we are now at the point where we know that our graduate students need the resources to be able to make a choice, and or to, not so much to make a choice, but to have options at the end of their graduate studies. There's nothing sadder for me than the idea of saying to graduate students, don't do your PhD, you might not get a job in academia. On the contrary, what we need to be able to do is to train PhD students who are going to have the option of continuing in academia or having a very fruitful career outside of academia. But they can acquire all the skills that they need as researchers. You don't have to abandon your identity as a researcher once you graduate from your PhD program. On the contrary, when we think of research, we have to think of research as a transferable skill. But of course, in order for that to be the case, the research training needs to encompass all the toolkits that we need in order to be able to see research as a transferable skill. And that requires the skills not only for innovation, but the skills for collaboration and partnerships. So all those skills that are associated with social, emotional, and ethical intelligence, teamwork, intercultural awareness, people skills, and so on.
Okay, great. Well, actually, now that you mentioned that whole list of skills, sometimes in my experience, you come across maybe, you know, a few people who seem like superheroes, who can do all of it, right? They can do the research. They are amazing at networking. They're fantastic at keeping their finances in order of their new entrepreneurial, but most of them, of us, we're all people. Most of us are not superheroes. So I think even if you provide all the training of possible skills you can have, at some point there's a limit to what people can do, what they actually have the talents for, but also time-wise, you can't expect them to become, 3 types of professionals all at once. So where does it, in your opinion, stop and become something that should be supported by other entities or facilities from the university or outside? How far can you go in expecting people to develop skills?
Right. Well, so I think in terms of the capacity of each individual to develop all the skills that they want, I mean, given infinite time, everyone, I think, could get to the point where they're at least competent. But yeah, there are definitely some restrictions. I think the problem is less how much can one individual learn, but more with what kind of infrastructure do we have available in academia to be able to make sure that the training that is needed to acquire these skills is available. And I think that it's right that at this point, it looks like one of the keys to being able to acquire and hone the skills that are needed for fruitful partnership resides at least in part in experiential learning. So in order to be able to be a good collaborator, in order to be able to lead a research team, in order to be able to create partnerships that are cross-sectoral, you need to not only know how, but you need to have had a chance to apply this knowledge. And that requires the researcher to have an opportunity to practice. And in the context of trying to make it the case that social science and humanities produce researchers who are well balanced when it comes to creating interdisciplinary collaborations and cross-sectoral partnerships, that means that we have to provide our graduate students as part of training opportunities to hone those. How do we do this? What kind of resources do we have at the university to be able to support that? In Canada, we're lucky because we have organizations such as MyTax, which is an organization whose focus is to provide researchers with opportunities for work integrated learning. So they fund internships in industry, in the not-for-profit sector, and even in government, which researchers, emerging researchers, are able to access. And this is often a transformative experience, not only for the researcher, but also for the community partner, because it's a bit of a mystery what a researcher can contribute to your business or to your not-for-profit or to your governmental organization if you haven't done it before. So there's learning on both sides here. And this is also key. It's not just the researcher that needs to learn how to transition into the real world. It's also the real world that needs to learn what the value is of the researcher and their skills. It's not something that I can tell you, it's something that I can show you. So these experiential learning opportunities are absolutely crucial to making that. There's a problem of access. I think that it's much easier for someone in engineering or in the sciences to find a spot in a co-op program or an internship in a business because it's clearer what the contribution an engineer can do to a project. It's often very technical and based on those technical skills. Whereas in the context or in the case of social science and humanities, the skills that are involved in a fruitful partnership, and the kinds of skills that can be mobilized as part of giving advice to a company or contributing to their research effort is much broader. So there's a little bit more of alignment and calibration that's needed in, upstream to make sure that these collaborations are fruitful.
Yes, and I agree. I think also maybe your argument you had before about a culture. I think there's also a more already of a developed culture within many industries of actually themselves finding, the right research and science, departments and clusters in order, because there's already sort of the idea of knowledge that they can make use of that scientific knowledge and involve them. That has, of course, been developed for years with science parks and tech transfer and everything that already existed, which is still very much in development for social science, humanities, or on the other hand, for policymakers in government. It's still often quite difficult and to find, where do I find the knowledge that I need? While the researchers on the other side might, offer it to the ones who are not ready to accept it yet.
And what's really interesting is that there's really two kinds of ways that a researcher can contribute in these kinds of experiential settings. They can, so a social science and humanities researcher could leverage or mobilize their expert knowledge. So for instance, it could be the case that a not-for-profit in the community needs to better address the issue of gendered violence. And so, of course, here, what they would want to learn is more about what gendered violence is, and relying on the expertise of someone whose research bears on that topic would be very relevant. But there's a sense in which humanistic knowledge, social science knowledge, is also very distinctive in that there's a know-how that the research has in terms of formulating questions and thinking through problems that we very rarely think of as an expert trait. It's sort of like this know-how is so deeply ingrained in what we do, and we focus so much on the content of our research that we forget how very specialized these research skills are and how valuable they could be in collaborative settings as well. Often in the context of social innovation, for instance, or you can think in terms of, like, imagine an organization that would leverage design thinking to create social enterprise. Having a researcher on their team who can think with them through the questions that arise, not so much as a content or subject matter expert, but as a researcher, would be very valuable, because they could help them identify underlying assumptions, or maybe even work through some methodological aspects that they wouldn't have thought so. And I think that there's a way in which we forget completely about this expertise that is the heart of social science and humanities, and that is very transferable. And we need to be able to see that as also something that can be valuably mobilized in order to support social impact. Of course, as in everything else, what is needed are exemplars and models for doing so. And I know that the collaborative has been, so our initiative has been very hard at work in trying to develop these kinds of new models for leveraging research know-how in the community. It's definitely something that it looks like it's something that, we never think about, but that would have a lot of value.
All right. So what I was wondering, a lot of the skills might maybe be skills that you feel, such as collaboration or talking to others, working in a team. Aren't there a lot of people who already just assume that they're already good at it anyway, or feel that they can develop that themselves? And is that accurate or enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you wouldn't be the first if you suggested, oh, collaboration is easy, just put people together and, you know, get them to work together. That's how you develop collaborative skills. And some people already know how to do it. I think that's true, just like anything. You know, there are people who have already high degrees of, you know, skills that are needed. But the question is there enough people who have those skills to foster fruitful collaborative settings? So do we really just need to rely on this? And I think the answer is obviously no, but even if it were yes, it's not enough to have the skills. You need also to be in an environment where these skills can be deployed in a way that is going to be effective. And in a context such as, you know, what happens often in the humanities and social sciences, where collaborations are not themselves valued, and especially cross-sectoral collaborations or anything that has to do with scholarly engagement, which is often ways that individual researchers can have impact. Well, there's no incentives to deploy these skills. On the contrary. So on the one hand, the assumption that most of these skills are just, you know, naturally owned and developed is not a very prudent assumption. I think we have to assume that it is part of research training to make sure that researchers have these skills to the highest degree possible so that they can enter in collaborative research and interdisciplinary research without being impeded in any way. And we also have to make sure that the effort that goes into developing these skills is recognized and is rewarded, because it is not easy to do so and to make it pan out.
So it requires more than just the training. It requires a whole system around it that incentivizes the use. So how would you describe the ideal training or approach to this?
Yeah, so yes, I think it's very important to emphasize how much the environment or the organizational infrastructure is important as a factor to deploying the skills. Often we think of skills for research or for whatever in terms of, well, does the individual have them? And as something that would be sufficient for the individual to be able to show that they have these skills. But a lot rests on organization, or a lot of it revolves around what kind of organizational structures are in place that are going to make it possible for you to deploy those skills. So, for instance, in a university where interdisciplinary research is faced to obstacles that have to do with, you know, the siloing of faculties, and is not rewarded, then it would be hard to exercise good collaborative practices beyond your own faculty. What is the ideal training for a researcher to have impact? I mean, impact, social impact or economic impact. I think that we have to see that training as geared towards experiential learning. So there has to be a component where the researcher gets to apply the skills and try out what it is to collaborate. And it's also a training where the researcher acquires the metacognitive toolkit to understand what those skills are that are valued and important and essential to good collaborative practices. And it is, of course, also a setting in which we think of social impact as a kind of innovation that requires co-design. And I know this may sound a little bit odd to think about co-design and as a tool for impact, but I think that if you're really going to have research partnerships that are cross-sectoral, where researchers are trying to address issues in the community. They have to work with the user, with the end users of the research. So this kind of end user integrated research, which is immensely impactful, it requires the creation of a community around the research, and that takes a lot of time, but it also takes the ability to be able to let your partners help you design your research, and that's the element of co-design that is needed. So investing in trying to understand what would be a good solution for the user of your research from the get-go, not at the tail end. That is something that is very important. And one last thing, I think that thinking about knowledge mobilization upstream before you start your research, how you want your impact to, what you want your impact to look like is also key. If you wait until your research is finished to think about what your impact has been or is going to be, there's something that's gone wrong. These kinds of features of best practices, they need to be part of the systemic thinking about knowledge mobilization. That's the reason why universities, but also funding agencies, have a role to play in getting us researchers to do the right things, creating the kinds of incentives that we need in order to really, take the time to do the right thing. If there are no incentives, if it's not rewarded, given everything that revolves around tenure and promotion, which are things that are absolutely essential to a flourishing research career, then we can't expect people to engage. But I guess the situation is different in Canada. It's different. Well, every country has their own priorities. But if I were to give any advice, I would say, get your students to think about the kind of impact that they want to have before. That's how you should train them.
And that almost sounds even more than like a skill that'll also improve your research excellence, not just the impact. The co-design part and the engaging and understanding before you start what your impact can or should or might be. So it even goes further than just the skills for impact.
I think that's right. I think best practices are what is going to make your research excellent. And it's, you have to have a holistic approach, all dimensions. Yeah.
What's interesting is what you mentioned. Actually, it seems almost that it's not necessarily about developing new skills, but acknowledging the skills that are already naturally part of certain disciplines and in the research training of certain disciplines, and actually applying that to other situations, more societal situations, more collaboration situations. If they already have certain strengths because of the nature of the research they do, why teach them a very different skill if you can also exploit, I guess that sounds a bit negative, but the one they already have and apply it in different settings.
Yeah,
maybe, but that's something I'm catching. Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's part of it that has to do with, for instance, in a collaborative setting, how do you deal with conflict? I mean, those are sort of, very practical kinds of toolkits you need in order to be able to address specific situations. But otherwise, there's a wealth of skills that the researcher has, which they haven't yet been able to articulate and communicate. So a lot of what is needed is a better understanding of what the skills are that researchers already have. So it's acquiring the metacognitive toolkits that are required in order to be able to articulate and communicate the value of the skills that you have. And so being more deliberate about the kind of research training you're acquiring as part of research training, it should be clear what the purpose of the skills is, and also how they can be transferred in other contexts. That is someone who knows how to do something and someone who knows that they know they can do something is two different things.
So maybe I can transfer that to a bit of a more personal, if I may ask a question. You know, having focused so much on all this in the past few years, I was wondering, first of all, is there something that in your younger years as a PhD student that you feel, oh, if only someone would have taught me this skill or told me how to use it differently, or in different settings, and what is it? And the second is there still a skill that you feel that you would really want some guidance in to develop?
Oh, wow.
I know I didn't put these questions on the prepared list.
Yeah, I feel I would be committing to something very big if I had a very clear answer to that question. So maybe, so the one thing that was never part of my training, which is now becoming part of the training of our graduate students, and which is becoming a focus in every workplace, academic, especially in academic workplace, are the kinds of skills that are needed to foster an inclusive workplace. And there's a sense in which it's not just about equity and diversity and inclusion. It's really a question about what kind of leadership and what kind of best practices inhabit my workplace. And diversity and inclusion, in order to be good at diversity and inclusion, you do need to have collaborative skills and, with an ACE, you need to have them very well. And that is something that was never part of my training. Never. On the contrary, I think that there's a lot of cultural habits that are anchored in the opposite. And it's hard to foster a diverse and inclusive workplace. And you need skills to be able to do it. So I think that this was missing back in my days, and it's still missing today. Again, social science and humanities, I think, are in a privileged spot to be thinking about this, because the best research on what does it mean to live in a fair society, what does it mean not to be racist, are topics for research in our disciplines. But there still is a question of how do we apply that knowledge in the context of research ecosystems or in the context of partnerships with the community. So I would say that those are probably the hardest skills to apply, because they require you to be able to think about collaborations in ways that show a lot of understanding for your own cognitive biases, for the diversity and what it really means. Yeah, I would think that those are probably the skills that I see are missing.
Okay, Sandra, so I have one last question before the interview is over. And it's a question I ask everyone that we've interviewed. As you know, AESIS generally is always focused on how to advance and evaluate societal impact of science. If there would be one thing that you find, if you had to choose one thing that's the most important to focus on, to have more effective or to optimize the scientific impact on society, what would it be?
See research as a partnership with society. It's hard to do it when you're a historian of logic in German world of the 19th century like I am, but maybe thinking of research know-how as something that goes much beyond your subject matter expertise is key to that. But yeah, partnerships.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra. This was the third interview we've had, and I'm enjoying it more and more and more. So thank you so much. It is, right? And who knows, maybe we'll do it again someday. I'm certain we will see each other, hopefully after the whole pandemic in real life again, at one of our events or meetings. But for now, I would like to thank you very much for sharing this information with us, with our members and everyone who's listening. And I'd like to thank also everyone who has been watching this. And I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.